August 1942. The Pacific was a vast theater of war, an endless stretch of ocean dotted with islands that had become pawns in a deadly global conflict. Among these, Guadalcanal, long a remote jungle-covered speck in the Solomon Islands, had suddenly emerged as a linchpin in the fight for control of the Pacific. Its airfield, later named Henderson Field by the Americans, represented not just a tactical advantage, but a strategic promise, the ability to project power across the region, to protect Australia, and to deny Japan the initiative. For the U.S. Marines, Guadalcanal was both a proving ground and a crucible. The men who landed on its beaches carried with them not just rifles and packs, but the weight of a nation's expectations. They were raw, many fresh from training camps in the United States, yet hardened by a sense of duty and the knowledge that their presence could tip the scales of an ongoing war. The jungle itself was an adversary, a tangled labyrinth of towering trees, thick undergrowth, and rivers that could rise without warning. Mosquitoes and disease claimed as many victims as enemy bullets in these early days, and every step forward required courage, endurance, and a steadfast will. By mid-August, the Americans had established a tenuous foothold on Guadalcanal. Along the Tenaru River, a natural barrier forming part of their defensive perimeter, the Marines dug in, constructing trenches, foxholes, and machine gun nests. Artillery positions were carefully calculated, overlapping fields of fire mapped with precision, each weapon sighted to cover potential avenues of enemy approach. This was not just preparation, it was anticipation. The Marines knew the Japanese were likely to respond swiftly and aggressively to the landing. Intelligence reports had warned of Colonel Ichiki's elite detachment, a force of approximately 900 men, trained, disciplined, and confident from earlier victories in the Pacific. Ichiki's reputation as a bold commander preceded him, and his orders were simple: strike hard, strike fast, and retake the initiative. But the Americans were ready. Major General Alexander Vandegrift, the commander of the 1st Marine Division, had emphasized a defensive strategy. "Hold your ground," he reportedly instructed. "Don't chase them into the jungle. Let the enemy come to you." For many of the men, this ran counter to instinct. Marines were trained to advance, to engage aggressively, to seize the momentum. Yet here, patience would be as deadly a weapon as any rifle or artillery shell. The night of August 20th was thick with tension. The moon hung low over the jungle canopy, casting long, shifting shadows across the river and sandbars. The Marines moved quietly, checking their positions, double-checking ammunition, and whispering terse orders to one another. Any movement could betray their presence. Any sound might give away the trap they had prepared. In the darkness, the river became both a barrier and a stage, a narrow funnel through which the enemy would inevitably pass. Ichiki's men were on the move. Confident, believing their speed and aggression would overwhelm any American defenses, they advanced through the dense undergrowth. Their training emphasized rapid, decisive action, charging into contact, never hesitating, never allowing the enemy to settle. But Guadalcanal was unlike any terrain they had faced before. The jungle slowed them, the night obscured them, and the Americans were patient, silent, waiting. When the first scouts reached the sandbars along the Tenaru, they found the ground deceptively still. A single machine gun nest lay concealed behind foliage. Rifles rested in calculated arcs of fire, and artillery positions were ready to rake the advancing lines. The Marines had held their positions, silent, disciplined, and unseen. Every man understood the stakes. Every man knew that tonight, patience would decide who lived and who died. As Ichiki's main body approached, the sounds of the jungle became punctuated by the rhythm of the enemy's march, the soft crush of leaves, the muted chatter of Japanese soldiers unaware of the trap, the occasional snapping of a twig underfoot. It was a symphony of motion that the Marines listened to with clinical precision. Their commander had made it clear: do not fire prematurely. Allow the enemy to enter the kill zone fully. Every second of delay increased the effectiveness of the defense.
By the early hours of August 21st, the Tenaru River had become a stage for what would become one of the most decisive engagements of the Guadalcanal campaign. The Japanese forces, numbering nearly 900, were within reach of the Marines' interlocking fields of fire. In that still, dark night, the outcome had already been set, not by the first bullet fired, but by careful preparation, strategy, and an understanding of human nature. The Marines were about to demonstrate a principle that would echo through the Pacific campaign. Sometimes the deadliest act is not in the charge, but in the patience to wait, to let the enemy come to you.
As the first light of dawn threatened the edges of the jungle canopy, Colonel Ichiki's detachment pressed forward. Trained, confident, and carrying the pride of the Imperial Japanese Army, these men believed victory would be swift. Their prior engagements in the Pacific had honed them into a unit accustomed to speed and aggression. To Ichiki, the Americans on Guadalcanal were yet another obstacle, a foothold to be crushed before it could mature into a real threat.
The march through the dense undergrowth was slow, deceptive. The jungle, however, masked the scale of the American defenses. The Tenaru River, seemingly a natural barrier, was in fact the centerpiece of a carefully orchestrated trap. The Marines' positions were not obvious. The interlocking fields of fire, concealed trenches, and camouflaged machine guns were invisible in the dim, shadowy pre-dawn light. Ichiki, counting on momentum and surprise, could not yet see the deadly preparation lying in wait. Confidence can be fatal in war. Ichiki's men, eager to demonstrate their prowess, moved with rigid discipline, trusting that their training and numbers would carry them forward. Yet the jungle itself worked against them. The riverbank was narrow, forcing them into a funnel that made every step predictable to the Marines lying in wait. Every branch that snapped, every footfall across dry leaves fed into the trap. By the time the detachment reached the sandbars along the Tenaru, they were already walking the final steps into a meticulously designed death zone.
Inside the American lines, Marines remained silent. The discipline required to withhold fire, to watch the enemy approach without reaction, tested even the most seasoned soldiers. This restraint was deliberate. Vandegrift's command philosophy for this engagement was simple but profound. Hold your positions, allow the enemy to fully expose themselves, and then unleash the coordinated firepower of machine guns, artillery, and rifles. The consequences of acting prematurely were understood. Every moment of patience maximized the lethality of the defense. Ichiki, meanwhile, was unaware of the danger ahead. Reports from scouts and prior reconnaissance suggested minimal resistance. He believed the Americans would respond to a frontal assault with limited resistance, allowing his men to exploit any weaknesses. What he did not anticipate was the level of preparation, the calm precision, and the readiness of the Marines on the Tenaru's banks. Every decision he made, every step forward, unknowingly walked him closer to catastrophe. By nightfall, the Japanese detachment was positioned along the sandbars and river edges. The moonlight glinted faintly on their rifles, highlighting the edges of their uniformed ranks as they formed up in preparation for an assault. Ichiki's orders were simple: maintain formation, advance aggressively, and overwhelm the Americans through speed and shock. Morale was high, confidence unwavering. The soldiers believed in the inevitability of victory, unaware that the Marines' patience had turned the battlefield into a death trap.
The Marines, however, were not idle. Artillery crews checked targeting coordinates, machine gunners verified ammunition belts, and officers whispered final instructions. Every man understood the plan. When the time came, their fire would be precise, synchronized, and devastating. The enemy's advance had been choreographed unknowingly by the very constraints of the terrain and the tactical acumen of the Americans. Patience had become a weapon as lethal as any rifle, as calculated as any artillery shell. As the hours crept by, tension mounted on both sides. Ichiki's men moved forward, confident but unaware. On the American side, the soldiers braced themselves, mentally preparing to witness and participate in one of the most lethal defensive actions in the Pacific campaign. The night and early morning had set the stage. The lines were drawn, and the first act of what would become the Battle of the Tenaru was poised to unfold. The first shots of the Battle of the Tenaru would not be fired until the Japanese were well within the trap. As the Ichiki detachment pressed forward under the cover of darkness and the shadowed jungle, the Americans held their fire. Every man in the line understood the principle at play. Allow the enemy to fully expose themselves, funnel them into the narrow sandbars along the river, and strike with overwhelming, coordinated firepower. The terrain itself dictated the pace. The riverbanks created natural channels, forcing Ichiki's men into predictable paths. These sandbars, seemingly innocent stretches of soft earth, had been mapped by the Marines for interlocking fields of machine gun and rifle fire. Artillery observers calculated angles and distances with precision. In a conflict where visibility was limited and uncertainty high, this preparation was critical. Every step the Japanese soldiers took brought them deeper into the carefully orchestrated lethal zone. Ichiki, confident in his doctrine of aggressive assault, failed to anticipate the patience and restraint of his adversaries. The Imperial Japanese Army emphasized shock and momentum. Hesitation or slow advance was seen as weakness. The Americans, however, were prepared to convert the enemy's confidence into disaster. Machine guns were camouflaged behind foliage, firing lanes meticulously planned, artillery primed to rake the advancing columns. The Marines' discipline would transform what appeared to be routine engagement into a devastating encounter. When the first Japanese soldiers reached the sandbar, they were unaware of the trap that surrounded them. The Americans remained silent, listening to the measured advance, watching as the enemy funneled into the heart of their defenses. Soldiers in foxholes checked their weapons, tightened grips on rifles, and exchanged no words beyond whispered confirmations of their orders. Every heartbeat, every second of patience increased the lethality of the impending action. Then came the order. The first volley erupted not at the edge of the line, but at the precise point where maximum enemy exposure was guaranteed. Machine guns opened fire simultaneously from multiple directions. Rifles joined in, and artillery shells raked the Japanese positions. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Soldiers who had marched confidently moments before found themselves trapped in a deadly crossfire. The darkness and the jungle, once concealing their approach, became a chaotic theater of destruction. Ichiki's men, though trained and disciplined, were unprepared for the sheer intensity and coordination of the Marines' response. Within minutes, the assault became a slaughter. Attempts to regroup or retreat were met with devastating fire from overlapping lines. The narrowness of the sandbars left little room to maneuver. Every step forward or back increased exposure to withering gunfire. The Japanese soldiers, who had come with the expectation of victory, were confronted with the brutal calculus of a well-prepared defense. The battle quickly settled into a grim rhythm. Waves of Japanese attackers advanced, only to be cut down by disciplined, interlocking fire. The Americans, still holding their positions, minimized their own casualties while maximizing the enemy's losses. This was not luck or chance. It was the result of careful planning, terrain exploitation, and a mastery of defensive tactics. By the time the first light of dawn began to seep into the jungle, hundreds of Japanese soldiers lay dead or dying, their advance completely halted. This initial engagement at the Tenaru River was decisive not because of sheer numbers alone, but because of strategy and patience. The Americans had transformed the landscape into a force multiplier. What might have been a chaotic jungle skirmish became a meticulously executed defensive operation, one that would resonate as a case study in military discipline, planning, and the deadly power of measured patience under fire. The night's violence left the Tenaru riverbanks littered with the grim evidence of battle. For the Marines, the victory was decisive.
But the human cost was visible in every shadow, in every echo of gunfire that had finally faded into silence. Over 800 Japanese soldiers had been killed in the course of the night, a staggering number that reflected both the scale of the assault and the effectiveness of the defensive trap. The Americans suffered remarkably few casualties, roughly 40 men, a testament to their preparation, discipline, and restraint. Walking among the aftermath, Marines were confronted with a scene that defied simple comprehension. Bodies of enemy soldiers lay strewn across the sandbars and riverbanks, many in positions that suggested they had never fully understood the danger into which they had walked. Equipment, rifles, and personal effects were scattered amidst the carnage. The jungle, once a neutral backdrop, had become a witness to one of the bloodiest defensive actions of the Pacific Campaign.
For the men who survived, the psychological impact was profound. Many had trained for combat, but few could have anticipated an enemy being funneled into such a devastating trap. Veterans would later recall the surreal combination of tension and calm, the silence before the first shot, the precise coordination of deadly fire, the moment when instinct to charge or flee had been suspended in favor of obedience and patience. Every decision, every second, had consequences measured in human life. Colonel Ichiki, meanwhile, had paid the ultimate price for underestimating the Americans and overestimating the advantages of speed and aggression. His detachment had been almost entirely annihilated. Leadership among the survivors collapsed. Panic replaced discipline, and those who attempted to retreat faced relentless fire from prepared positions. The doctrine of bold, aggressive assault, a hallmark of Ichiki's command style, had collided catastrophically with the Marines' defensive acumen.
Yet, even amid victory, the Marines understood the gravity of the situation. This was not glory or triumph in the abstract, it was the lethal reality of war. Letters and diaries from survivors reveal a mixture of exhaustion, solemnity, and recognition of the deadly efficiency that had saved their own lives. They had witnessed the power of preparation, patience, and strategy, but also the indiscriminate toll that war exacted on soldiers on both sides. The Battle of the Tenaru would become more than just a tactical victory. It was a demonstration of doctrine in action. Military historians and strategists would study the engagement for years to come, noting the effectiveness of letting an enemy expose themselves fully before unleashing concentrated fire. The event underscored the importance of terrain, anticipation, and discipline over mere numerical strength or raw aggression.
In later years, veterans of the battle reflected on what they had experienced with a mixture of pride and solemn remembrance. They had survived because of strategy, not luck, and they had witnessed the deadly consequences of misjudgment and overconfidence. The jungle, which had once seemed an impenetrable obstacle, now bore silent testimony to the meticulous planning and courageous execution that had defined the engagement. By dawn, the Tenaru River was no longer just a geographic feature. It had become a symbol, a grim reminder that in war, preparation and patience could wield a power as lethal as any assault. For the U.S. Marines, the night had solidified lessons in strategy that would shape subsequent battles on Guadalcanal, from Edson's Ridge to later campaigns across the Pacific. For the Japanese, it was a sobering introduction to the deadly efficiency of their opponent.
The Battle of the Tenaru was not won by chance. It was a triumph of tactical foresight and calculated patience. Major General Alexander Vandegrift and his staff had carefully analyzed the terrain and enemy tendencies, ensuring that every position, every weapon, and every soldier had a specific role to play. The deliberate restraint displayed by the Marines was not passive, it was a manifestation of disciplined strategy under extreme pressure. The defensive positions along the river were crafted to exploit both geography and psychology. The narrow sandbars served as natural funnels, limiting the enemy's ability to maneuver and exposing them to enfilade fire from multiple directions. Machine gun emplacements were hidden behind foliage, carefully camouflaged to prevent detection. Artillery observers monitored the approaches, ready to unleash canister and shell fire with precise timing. The Marines' riflemen were positioned to cover every potential avenue of approach, their lines overlapping to create interlocking fields of fire that left no blind spots.
Ichiki's force, trained to advance rapidly and exploit perceived weaknesses, found itself operating under conditions it had not encountered in prior engagements. The jungle, the river, and the darkness all conspired to disrupt the Japanese assault doctrine. Each step they took into the trap amplified the effectiveness of the Marines' defensive fire. By the time the first shots were fired, the enemy was already fully exposed, constrained, and vulnerable. The execution of the defense required impeccable timing. Every weapon had to fire in coordination. Every squad had to maintain discipline under the sudden shock of combat. The Marines' ability to maintain cohesion while delivering devastating firepower was a testament to both training and leadership. Officers and non-commissioned officers ensured that every man understood his role, reinforcing a culture of control and precision that proved decisive. The human factor was equally critical. Many of the Marines were young, inexperienced, and far from home, yet they demonstrated remarkable composure under fire. Veteran accounts describe the strange juxtaposition of tension and calm, the intensity of the moment counterbalanced by the unwavering focus on duty and orders. This psychological steadiness magnified the lethality of their positions, turning the battlefield into a theater where preparation and patience reigned supreme.
As the Japanese soldiers advanced, their initial confidence eroded rapidly. The interlocking machine gun fire, combined with artillery barrages, inflicted casualties faster than Ichiki could reorganize his lines. Retreats were met with relentless pursuit and suppressive fire, while attempts to regroup were thwarted by the careful positioning of Marines throughout the sandbar and riverbank. In less than a few hours, what had begun as a disciplined assault dissolved into chaos and destruction. The effectiveness of the defense was further enhanced by the natural features of the terrain. The dense jungle limited the enemy's visibility and movement, while the riverbanks constrained their advance and retreat. The combination of terrain exploitation, pre-planned positions, and disciplined fire control created a situation where a smaller defending force could annihilate a larger, aggressive opponent. This was not luck. It was the deliberate application of tactical genius in the midst of chaos. By the end of the engagement, the scale of the Japanese losses underscored the deadly effectiveness of the Marines' approach. Roughly 800 Japanese soldiers were killed, compared to approximately 40 Marines. The victory was decisive, and its lessons would influence the U.S. Marine Corps doctrine in subsequent battles. The principles demonstrated, patience, preparation, and coordination, became essential elements of the American defensive strategy in the Pacific theater. The Battle of the Tenaru River stands as a testament to the power of tactical foresight and disciplined execution. It was a night where strategy, psychology, and terrain converged to produce an outcome that would shape the course of the Guadalcanal campaign and the broader Pacific War. For the Marines, it was a defining moment that reinforced the importance of preparation over impulse, of patience over rash action, and of coordinated precision over sheer force. When the gunfire finally subsided and the jungle fell silent, the scale of the carnage along the Tenaru River became painfully clear. The night had exacted a heavy toll on Colonel Ichiki's detachment. Nearly 800 Japanese soldiers lay dead, their bodies a grim testament to the lethality of well-prepared defenses. Among the survivors, shock and disorientation were widespread, as the survivors struggled to comprehend how a single night could decimate a force that had marched confidently into battle, believing in their inevitable victory. For the Marines, the aftermath was a mixture of relief, solemnity, and reflection. Casualties had been remarkably low, around 40 men, but even this small number represented lives changed forever. Letters, diaries, and post-battle interviews revealed that many Marines were struck not by pride alone, but by the enormity of the human cost. The efficiency of their strategy had saved lives, yet it had simultaneously produced a scene of devastation unparalleled in their previous experiences. The jungle, once a mere obstacle to movement, had become a silent witness to the deadly consequences of warfare. The battle also offered crucial lessons in both tactics and strategy. The concept of letting the enemy come to you, often considered counterintuitive, had proven overwhelmingly effective. Patience, discipline, and the careful exploitation of terrain allowed a smaller, well-prepared force to annihilate a numerically comparable but less strategically positioned opponent. This principle would guide the Marines in future engagements on Guadalcanal and throughout the Pacific, reinforcing the value of defensive planning and fire discipline. Colonel Ichiki's aggressive doctrine, by contrast, illustrated the perils of overconfidence. The Japanese had excelled in speed, surprise, and morale in previous campaigns, but at Tenaru, these strengths became liabilities. The failure to anticipate the Americans' defensive preparations and the disciplined restraint of the Marines turned the Japanese advance into a catastrophic blunder. In military terms, it highlighted the danger of underestimating an opponent's preparation and the importance of reconnaissance, terrain awareness, and flexibility in planning. The broader Guadalcanal campaign was profoundly influenced by this encounter. The battle demonstrated to both sides the deadly stakes of controlling the island and reinforced the strategic significance of Henderson Field. For the Marines, Tenaru validated their training, leadership, and doctrine, giving them confidence to withstand subsequent Japanese attacks. For the Japanese command, the loss was a harsh lesson in the limitations of aggressive tactics against a well-prepared and disciplined opponent.
Even decades later, historians and veterans alike have noted the symbolic importance of the Tenaru River engagement. It was a clash where planning, psychology, and terrain converged, where patience became a weapon, and where the measured application of force produced results far exceeding raw numbers. The lessons learned extended beyond Guadalcanal, influencing U.S. Marine Corps doctrine and serving as a case study in effective defensive warfare. The human element, the courage, discipline, and resolve of individual Marines remains at the center of the story. Amid the horror and destruction, the soldiers of the 1st Marine Division executed their orders with precision, professionalism, and a level of composure that allowed them to emerge victorious. Their actions at Tenaru stand as enduring examples of how discipline, preparation, and strategic patience can shape the outcome of battle, even in the most unforgiving of environments. The Battle of the Tenaru River did more than secure a tactical victory. It set the tone for the broader Guadalcanal campaign and demonstrated a crucial evolution in the conduct of warfare in the Pacific. The engagement became a textbook example of how preparation, terrain exploitation, and disciplined execution could amplify the effectiveness of a smaller force against a determined, aggressive opponent. In the immediate aftermath, the American command recognized the importance of integrating lessons learned from Tenaru into the ongoing campaign. Defensive positions were strengthened throughout Guadalcanal, patrols and reconnaissance intensified, and interlocking fields of fire became standard in areas where Japanese assaults were expected. The Marines understood that the Japanese would continue to test their positions with bold, often suicidal attacks, and that survival depended on maintaining the discipline that had proven so lethal at Tenaru. The psychological impact on both sides was equally profound. For the U.S. Marines, the victory instilled confidence in their training and tactics. Soldiers learned that courage was not measured solely by aggression, but also by restraint and adherence to strategy. Meanwhile, the Japanese command had to contend with the sobering reality that past methods of rapid assault and overwhelming aggression could fail catastrophically against a prepared and patient opponent. The doctrine of charging blindly into enemy positions, which had served the Imperial Army well in earlier campaigns, was now exposed as dangerously flawed in certain contexts. Tenaru also became emblematic of the broader strategic importance of Guadalcanal.
Henderson Field, the objective that had initially drawn the U.S. Marines to the island, could not have been defended without disciplined and intelligent use of terrain and firepower. The battle proved that the control of key points, rivers, sandbars, and jungle corridors, could determine the fate of entire detachments. Subsequent engagements on the island, including the defense of Edson's Ridge, reflected the lessons learned at Tenaru, with Marines employing similar tactics of patience, preparation, and coordinated fire to repel Japanese attacks.
Historically, the Tenaru River engagement serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of war, as well as the precision and thought required to achieve victory. It highlighted the intersection of leadership, strategy, and human endurance. The Marines' ability to execute a perfectly timed defensive action against a numerically comparable force underscored the importance of training, discipline, and mental resilience in the face of chaos. Even decades after the battle, historians analyze Tenaru not merely for its tactical significance, but also for its broader implications. The engagement illustrates the evolution of American defensive doctrine in the Pacific Theater, the importance of understanding and exploiting terrain, and the deadly consequences of overconfidence in combat. Veterans' accounts, official after-action reports, and historical studies all reinforce the lesson that preparation, patience, and coordinated execution can overcome aggression, pride, and sheer numbers.
The night at the Tenaru River was, in essence, a crucible. It tested strategy against instinct, preparation against audacity, and discipline against momentum. The Marines emerged victorious, not through luck or overwhelming force, but through calculated, disciplined execution of defensive principles. The battle became a defining moment in the Pacific War, a demonstration of the deadly effectiveness of letting the enemy come to you, and a symbol of the resilience, professionalism, and courage of the U.S. Marines on Guadalcanal. The Battle of the Tenaru River has endured not only as a military engagement, but as a study in the psychology, strategy, and human cost of war. Over 80 years later, its lessons continue to resonate, both in historical scholarship and military doctrine. The Marines' success was not the result of improvisation or luck. It was the outcome of careful planning, disciplined execution, and the strategic patience to allow the enemy to expose themselves fully. For the men on the ground, the night was a test of nerves, endurance, and moral courage. Soldiers were faced with the responsibility of executing orders that required them to hold fire while the enemy approached, fully aware that hesitation or error could cost lives on both sides. The disciplined restraint they displayed underscores a fundamental truth of combat. Victory is often determined not by who fires first, but by who waits for the right moment to strike. Strategically, the battle validated the U.S. Marines' defensive doctrine in the Pacific Theater. The combination of terrain exploitation, interlocking fields of fire, and coordinated artillery demonstrated that smaller, well-positioned forces could decisively repel larger aggressive attacks. These principles would be applied repeatedly throughout Guadalcanal and in later campaigns, shaping the success of American forces in subsequent Pacific battles. The human cost of the battle cannot be overlooked. Nearly 800 Japanese soldiers were killed, a staggering loss that reflected both the effectiveness of the Marines' preparation and the devastating consequences of overconfidence in combat. American casualties, by contrast, remained low at roughly 40, highlighting the efficiency of the defensive positions and the importance of planning, discipline, and coordinated fire. Veterans' recollections emphasize the combination of horror and solemn reflection that accompanied such a decisive, lethal engagement. Tenaru also served as a stark illustration of the consequences of leadership decisions under fire. Colonel Ichiki's aggressive approach, rooted in speed and audacity, collided with an opponent who had anticipated his moves and exploited every weakness.
Leadership, doctrine, and terrain awareness prove far more decisive than sheer courage or momentum. For military historians and strategists, Tenaru remains a case study in the deadly effectiveness of calculated patience and disciplined execution.
Beyond the tactical and operational lessons, the battle holds symbolic significance. It demonstrated that victory often depends on preparation, discipline, and understanding one's environment as much as on weaponry or numerical strength. The Marines' actions reinforced the ethos of the Corps, emphasizing resilience, strategy, and professionalism even in the most extreme circumstances. The legacy of the Tenaru River extends into both historical memory and military teaching. It influenced future U.S. Marine operations on Guadalcanal, contributed to the development of Pacific theater defensive tactics, and provided enduring lessons in command, preparation, and battlefield psychology. For the Marines who fought there, the engagement was a defining moment, a testament to courage under fire, and the lethal power of patience and strategy. Ultimately, the Battle of the Tenaru River stands as a timeless example of how preparation, discipline, and tactical acumen can overcome aggression and overconfidence. It is a story of calculated execution in the face of chaos, a moment where the environment, leadership, and human resolve converged to shape the outcome of history. Its lessons continue to inform military strategy, honor the courage of those who fought, and remind future generations of the profound cost and consequences of war.